All right, we are live, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk Lake County. I'm your David Rich. I'm your David Rich. I'm your host, David Rich. We have a very special, frequently reoccurring guest on the show, Alexandria Keating Sofiakis. Hello, how are you?
Doing well. Hope everyone else is doing well too today.
Cool. Did you have a nice holiday?
Actually, Easter for us isn't until
Oh,
next
that's
week.
right. Orthodox, it's different. You guys, okay.
Yeah.
That
So
happened
we
during
get all the Easter
the
candy on
Great
Tuesday.
Schism, the central authority, the date of Christmas and Easter. Okay, so
Yep, we get the candy on cheap afterwards.
there you go. That's frugal. Okay, cool. So today we're going to talk about animal rights. This is a topic that I spent a lot of time studying, researching, contemplating rights in general, mostly pertain to humans. But definitely during my pathway of research there, I have looked into animal rights a bunch. And it's definitely a very interesting topic and one that is worthy of attention and consideration for sure. So why don't you kind of go off, start us off with kind of like a general framework of like where you're coming from.
Well, from my perspective, obviously, not obviously, but I'm super biased. I'm a vegan. I'm hyper pro animal rights and stuff like that. But I think to get us situated, we should get sort of a groundwork for where the bedrock of how we've gotten to today starts.
Okay.
And so our modern framework of how we jurisdict and all that for animal rights and stuff like that originates with ancient Greece. Now, back then, that far, it was very different. They had this concept of basically a negative miasma whenever any death occurred. Didn't matter if it was intentional or accidental. Didn't matter if it was an animal that did it to the person or even an animate object. They would have these trials outdoors and then banish that object because too much negative energy was considered bad. Long story short, that precedent would ultimately set what would happen in the medieval ages, where animals would actually be considered in effectively the same moral framework as humans. And so they would be put on trial just as if they were people, plaintiffs, defendants, etc.
Really?
Eventually a bunch of philosophers, and I could expand on that a little bit further, but this is just a brief overview. A lot of philosophers are like, hey, we should effectively characterize these things as automatons because if they don't have the same will and stuff that we don't view humans as having, then they're just doing God's thing. And so they should be completely exempt from this. And that ended up passing eventually over time. And so animal trials went out of the way. And then eventually Charles Darwin comes around and a bunch of huge evolution and our awareness of animal sentience and animal evolution just skyrockets through the roof.
Yep.
And so now the reverse is starting to happen to where now we want to sort of bring them back into the legal scene again, but not under the same pretext as before, which is to use as justification to punish them, but rather to typically use it as justification to give them the same rights that a lot of people have, to restrict them from undue testing and stuff like that. Like testing on animals is a big thing in the animal rights community right now, especially because that one has a pretty low effectiveness rate. I remember for beagle specifically, more than 90% of the times it fails. So I'm like, what's the efficiency of it at that point? So yeah, that's just sort of the brief overview of how we've gotten to where we are today.
Okay, no, very cool. I didn't know a lot of that. I didn't know that the animals would actually have their day in court. Who defended them?
I actually wrote a little bit down about this. This is a famous case. Well, not a famous case to me and my friend group because I mentioned it to everybody because it's just absolutely hysterical. It's called the Autun rat case. And it happened during roughly the 1200s. The plaintiff was the Catholic Church, and the defendants were a bunch of rats. Basically, the town of Autun, the barley crop had spoiled, and the rats were blamed for it. They got into the crops and everything like that. And so this guy named Bartholomew Chassany, he decided, you know what, I can make a name for myself if I decide to defend these rats. And so he shows up the first day. They were tried in ecclesiastical court, and the crime was destruction of property. And so this is how they did that at the time. And for a little bit of further context, domesticated animals at the time would be tried in secular courts, but since the rats obviously weren't domesticated, they were tried in the ecclesiastical court. And so the first day, he shows up and he's like, hey, there was only notices there. Obviously, he's like, the judge is like, why are the rats here? And we as people can realize he can't control the rats, but he's like, oh, well, you see, you only put notices out in the town itself and the crime happened in the field, so you have to put the notice out there. And then they're like, okay, fine. So they dismiss the people, put the notices out there, even in the field, to the rats that they have to show up to the case. A week passes, they come back, and then he says, hold on, wait, because again, the rats aren't there. The rats are effectively farmers, and look at French precedent. The farmers get extra periods of time to gather their stuff and gather their affairs before coming to trial. The judge is like, you're really stretching the definition of it, but fine, we'll dismiss it again. And then they come back a third time about a month later, and he says, listen, my clients have, the guy defending the rats is like, listen, my clients have all intention of showing up, but we've now just discovered that there are assassins, cats, all over the streets. My clients rightfully fear for their lives. And so they delayed it again, and eventually the case got dropped, and so he was able to clear the rats from the rest of the Catholic Church.
Well, that sounds more like a cartoon on a Saturday.
And it's real history.
Because like, how are the rats supposed to read the notice?
No,
they showed up, or they like, how are they supposed to speak? They don't talk.
And
like,
okay.
I'm gonna. That sounds fascinating to me, and I mean that in the most positive sense. Like, that's interesting to me.
Yeah. Well, and part of all the fallacies that we can think of are obviously part of the reason why the people who are actually legislating this wanted to get rid of these. But back then, a lot of people genuinely believed that like they were on the same moral capacity as humans, and they had like evil in their souls sometimes attached and stuff like that. So it would typically be the populace pushing for these, whereas the clergy themselves and like the judiciary would want to like tamper down this sentiment. Nowadays, the roles have kind of flipped to where, yes, the state and the judiciary are trying to sort of tamper a little bit sentiments from the public around animals. And it is around legislation and them being in courts more. But it's not because people want to punish animals more. It's because they want to protect animals more. Sort of how the rules have been flipped.
That's interesting.
But the dynamics are similar.
Yeah, no, I'm going to definitely look into that. That's fascinating. But I would say probably somewhat safely that like our notion of human rights nowadays, at least in this country and probably Europe, come from more like Enlightenment figures like John Locke, Rousseau. Those are probably the two big headers there. Especially Locke. The Declaration of Independence starts off with a most partial quote of his. Like, he said, "Life, liberty, and the pursuit of property." Jefferson changes to "life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." But the Constitution is based on English common law, which in large part, after that point, came from Locke. But it was almost exclusively towards humans, and so I have this like kind of like outline here of like why might animals have rights, the main arguments, and like you said, sentience is probably the number one thing. The reason why people have rights is because of sentience, because of self-awareness. We're rational moral agents with free will and a body. If we weren't rational moral agents with free will, we wouldn't have rights. That's where the ability that you because a right is a moral, according to nowadays, usually, not always, is a moral allowance for behavior. Okay, people think it's like, that's why I argue all the time that there's no such thing as a legal right. That's why I agree with the fact that rights are natural. All you have to do is be a naturally born human person to have them. If you can reason morally. And if you have free will, it means you have the ability to choose and you are responsible for your choices, and therefore you can be held accountable for them. And you have a body, which is sort of like the medium by which you perform all these things. That kind of thing. And so like people argue like, well, yeah, okay, well, I mean, there's some amount of sentience in animals. Sure, that's easy. You see, they're living creatures. I get it. But do they have the same degree of and their necessary condition of moral reasoning that we do? And some people would argue yes, and some people are like, no, of course not. Lion goes off and just like kills a gazelle, no problem. Whatever else. But the problem with those analogies is you can apply every one of those to the human condition too. But the difference is we hold each other accountable when we do them. Animals don't seem to do that, seemingly.
Not just that, but we have a better, because we're humans, we naturally have a better window into what the other person is saying and stuff. Like, we are only just starting to understand some of the social structures of other animals. So it's hard for us to make a holistic value judgment when we still are learning about the behaviors. I remember just I think it was a couple of months ago, I watched a video, and it's this fascinating channel. He does a bunch of analyses about spiders, and I love it because it's helped me get over my fear of spiders. And they did this study where they looked at tiny jumping spiders, and they're so small that like their exoskeleton hasn't like molted or something properly, whatever. And so you could see on the inside. And not only did these baby jumping spiders demonstrate individual behavior, some would decide to sleep in the corner and build a little web there. Some would decide to hang on their threads, but only sometimes, others every time. And the ones that slept on their threads, they could see into their organs and see the eye movements when they were sleeping, exactly replicating what our eyes do during REM sleep.
Yeah. Wow.
These tiny, minuscule jumping spiders that aren't even like a fragment of my thumb.
Right.
Like, so we have to be cautious. They definitely don't have the same social dynamics, obviously, that humans do. But I know from my perspective, obviously, as someone who leans more towards giving them more rights, is that shouldn't matter. If they have the capacity to feel pain, then it would be not necessarily advantageous, but in a vacuum, it sounds more morally just to say, well, then we should try to minimize that. That doesn't mean, say, for example, oh, well, even though I'm a vegan, killing animals is unjust, and so therefore, even if that means starvation, we should stop all the slaughtering of cows right now.
Right.
Like, no, that's going way too far. But likewise, I know for me and a lot of others saying like, oh, fur farming, where these foxes are kept in wire cages, suspended from the ground their entire lives, and then strangled in horrible ways, all for a fur coat, when we have like other ways to make that exact thing effectively, like that is something I think we could, as a society, justify getting rid of. And with all these things, it comes into and I think I mentioned this before, the distinction between moral duty and moral, what's the other? I'm totally blanking out. Moral aspirations, I'll call it. Why blank?
Utility?
Yeah, utility. I'm trying to
The big division in morality is like deontology, which is duty bound, and then there's teleology, which is like effects bound or the function.
Yeah. But basically things that are nice aspirations and things I would consider moral duties. And to give an example, if like, say someone fell over on the street and there's no cars around, no risk to you, I consider it a moral duty if you have the physical capacity to help them. But if, say, you would risk getting hit by a car yourself to save yourself, then that like goes above and beyond. That would be super great of you to do and risk that, but nobody should be morally expected to do that.
Right.
And as we're starting to learn more about animals and stuff like that, I think we're seeing in the public that the common ground, the average person's disposition of where that line should be drawn, is a little bit more towards in favor of animal rights. It's not probably where I would do it. I don't think most people are particularly concerned about like the conditions of chickens in cages and stuff like that on a daily basis.
Right.
But I do think, as we've seen, like for example, with the Richland dogs case, there are a bunch of activists that like cut down a fence and broke down windows, getting the dogs that are being tested on, and almost all the comments are universally in support of them.
Mm-hmm.
And like in almost any other instance, let me put it this way, if those were people in ice cages, you know that there would be a lot of Republicans flipping out about that. But yeah, there are a lot of people, even people I've seen that have like MAGA and stuff on their profile, that are totally supporting these people. And so for certain species, especially like dogs and domesticated pets like that, I think there's a significant window. I wish kind of, there are some Democrats that love to talk about bipartisanship, but they're kind of silent on this issue. And this is the type of issue that you actually can get some bipartisan work done. A lot of the Republicans, for how terrible I think they are as people in Congress, they actually legislate half decently more often than not when it comes to animal rights and increasing them. I
think people would be surprised to hear how much Nancy Mace from South Carolina, who's like, now that IMTG is gone, the queen of the Republicanism, has advocated for strong animal protections, not rights I think in the fundamental sense that we're talking about, but yeah, no, for sure. But then you have like psychos like, Kristi Noem, who shot her dog because she didn't like him, Yeah, no. I agree. People don't, generally speaking, people don't like to see other living beings suffer. And I would say to anybody watching, like, you want to change your mind and heart on this. There are plenty of documentaries out there about this kind of stuff. Forks Over Knives. Start with that one. And there's one, oh gosh, it's narrated by Joaquin Phoenix. Oh, what is it called? It's put out by Pete. I can't
Oh,
remember what it's called.
I know what
Very
you're
powerful.
talking about too because I watched it.
Very powerful. Very powerful.
Yeah, I
And
like Joaquin's work.
you know, I mean, yeah, look at any like video footage of the insides of a slaughterhouse. Ugh. You
Yeah,
know, it's
oof,
terrifying. That's and
shivers
most
in my
people will probably
bones.
stop eating meat if they saw it. But so okay, you know. Um, yeah, no, so I mean, but yeah, so you mentioned suffering. I mean, suffering is one of the key ideas here. You know, if a sentient being can experience suffering, according to the utilitarian ethic, you're obligated to minimize that suffering. Okay, because the whole idea is the greatest good for the greatest amount of sentient beings, and the minimization of suffering is like key to that. So yeah, no, for sure. And it's obviously animals can experience suffering. We all know that. We've all seen it happen. There's no real problem there. And it's a matter of like being, you know, just sort of like morally consistent, you know, instead of just being like, you know, an elitist or having an agenda like, oh, just for us and not, you know, morality for me and not for thee kind of thing. You know, so the animals have basic interests, you know, to avoid pain, to live, to move freely, to engage in natural behaviors. These interests, you know, to a lot of people, justify rights protecting them.
And these aren't new. I mean, as far as how much success it's getting nationally, definitely, or globally, definitely new, I think, for us collectively as a species. But as far as like these particular points we're making, I mean, these aren't particularly new. For people that are interested in like ancient philosophers, I encourage you to read what Plutarch and the little bit of fragments we still have secondhand quoted from Theophrastus and Porphyry, what they have to say about animal rights, like eating animal flesh and stuff like that. And they were the first people really to like make the moral argument. There were some Greeks before them, Greek philosophers who also like didn't eat meat, but for them it was more so a refraining thing. Oh, this is a luxury, so we're refraining from luxuries, humble type of thing. Later, towards roughly 200 BC up until 600 BC, we started seeing some of the first arguments that actually, you know, these beings, because they had it was pretty unanimous, everything had souls as far as the thinking at the time was concerned. So it's like, look, these things clearly have souls. These things clearly have some capacity to feel pain, etc., etc. And therefore, we should have some capacity of mercy upon them and not be completely indifferent to their experience.
Right. Right. You know, yeah, no, for sure. And they're also like just, you know, isolated from like kind of secular philosophical reasoning or moral reasoning. You have like, you know, cause, you know, love, you know, God, these are God's creation. These are, you know, God loves all of his creation or her creation. And, you know, like, you know, why would, you know, you think an all just, all fair, all loving God is going to like look upon us, one species as, you know, morally inferior to another one? Like that doesn't make any sense. You know, Buddhism is very big on that. Jainism is like you cause no harm. Jainism is probably the only real, well, Jainism and most of Buddhism are the ones that really put peace and non-suffering at its center. You bet. You know, most of the other religions like, oh, just do what God tells you to do, no matter what it is. Like, I don't know. Hold on. But okay, so you know, so like nowadays with like, you know, common practices, like our industrial agricultural practices concerning animals right now is disgusting. It is vile. So even if not you're not disposed or inclined towards, you know, to quit eating meat entirely, there, you know, there's free range, there's, you know, there's a bunch of different labels. It's more than free range. What's it called when it's when these chickens were not harmed? These
Cage free.
What?
Oh, not cage free.
No, it's called something anyway.
Cruelty free.
You know, like there are, you know, I'm sorry, you're not going to like this probably, but there are more humane ways that ways in which you can actually kill an animal. Sorry for the word, but that's how it goes. Without causing it suffering. Okay. And you can raise it and you can love it and be friends with it and all sorts of glorious things, but at the end of the day, you're going to eat it. Okay. So there are better ways of doing it. If again, you know, not getting meat. My point is like, you know, there are still steps towards being better at this than what we're at now, even if it means not giving up eating meat entirely. Does that make sense?
Yes, and now I just totally randomly remember the word I was looking for earlier. The distinction between moral duty, and moral virtue. That was the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
Moral virtue.
Yeah, you're right.
So yeah, and absolutely. For myself,
moral virtue is about seeing value in things. Not
exactly.
Just moral duty. Moral duty is about doing what you're told to do. It's rule based. I hate that crap.
Yeah, this is why I actually
We're
have to.
organic living beings, folks. It should stir your soul. Okay,
Hmm.
like finding value in something. Like, I'm not going to hurt this because it's valuable. Why would I do that? It has value.
Hmm.
That doesn't make any sense. Okay.
Yep, yep. And I have to clap down a little bit at some of my fellow vegans who I respect a lot, but can be a bit more of the proselytizing type. And I think they need to do a better job of making that distinction and focusing more on the tangible things. Like if your goal is to convince all of humanity to share the disposition that I share, that like all animals' lives are worth it and type stuff like that, et cetera, wouldn't even have eggs or dairy or anything like that. That's not an achievable goal. That's trying to make everybody have the same moral values unequivocally to a very
Yeah,
specific degree.
that's not going to happen.
If you're trying to do something, which is why I appreciate groups that are more like Animal Rights Coalition Chicago and stuff like that, that focus on things that are achievable, in my opinion. So, for example, a fur-free nation eventually within our lifetimes. I think that's a bit more achievable, at least like the fur farms and stuff like that.
Sure.
Getting rid of foie gras. I think that's pretty achievable. Even my grandma's like, ew, they still serve that at the dishes? That's barbaric. And to give context, she's at Kokoretsi, which if people don't know, it's stuffed lamb guts. So even she was like, yeah, exactly. And even she was like, foie gras is cool. So that tells you something.
That's the duck dish, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep, where they force feed them and their livers swell.
Yeah. No, there's again, folks. Just type in animal rights documentaries. Just please. There are images of shows that I can't remember the names of coming to mind as you describe all these things. Like the things that they feed chickens. Chicken.
Yep.
Like, what is that?
And the people that are trying to like defend these industries know that. It's part of the reason why, for example, when they were prosecuting people for there was a recent California case where somebody rescued a couple chickens from like a farm and stuff like that, and they wouldn't allow her to submit any evidence about how the chickens were actually treated,
right,
at all. And like that's because they know that the second the public sees it, they're going to be like, oh wait, this is kind of messed up. We kind of don't support this. So, like same with the to expand a little bit more on the original dog case, there's a beagle testing facility and breeding facility in Dane County, Wisconsin, and they have over 2,000 beagles. And there have been over 30 reports of complaints of abuse, vocal cords cut without anesthetic, cherry eye surgery, which is the extra eyelid that dogs have cut up without anesthetic, piles of dead dogs literally being on the cage and not being able to even touch the floor or see sunlight their whole lives. And what is happening is rather than being shut down, which they are obligated to do by the state, they're being protected by the cops, who it's their jurisdiction to shut this place down. And instead, they're arresting people who are protesting outside or who are trying to get in and stuff like that. And so now we're seeing groups of activists take matters in their own hands. And part of the argument for this is, yes, we are committing property damage to get into this place, but that is a less significant crime than the damage that is being done. And I forget the exact name, but there is some legal precedent for that on top of the secondary precedent, which is for dogs specifically and other domesticated pets. In like Wisconsin and stuff like that, you could break a car window if you see a dog's in danger.
Oh, yeah. No, I've heard about that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And
if
so
it's a hot day and somebody leaves their dog and the car window's up and they go shopping,
and some of the most heartbreaking things was that during the most recent rescue operation, they got 28 out and the police confiscated 6. They did not look at the piles, literally bigger than this notebook of evidence of abuse, or look at the dogs. They just immediately took them in the cage and immediately drove them back to the facility. And I'm like, at some point, that's just being negligent. And the prosecutor, he's even said his own words. 1, he hasn't actually gone on the facility at all whatsoever. And 2, when he was prosecuting them, he was not prosecuting them as they operate today, but as previous investigations operated them. So therefore, any evidence post 2021 or something like that was irrelevant to his judgment, when more than 90% of the evidence is post that.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah. No,
and then he's coming out and saying that the guy who's leading this and stuff like that, who has won multiple legal cases, and he wouldn't have no legal basis to do what he's doing, to be able to do 30 plus open rescues and only be arrested once. But yet he's being labeled as the person who's not a credible source. He's not credible, and he doesn't believe anything he says, the attorney general or whatever of the area. And I'm like, it's just complete nonsense. And it's just so, everything in our country, it feels like, is rules for thee and not for me. And like people are held to a different standard,
No,
and people like Trump can constantly break whatever law and they don't get to be held accountable for it. Whereas everybody else, they cannot even break the law and still be punished.
yeah.
I mean, we're constantly seeing these people like break the law in front of our face, as with this case, on top of like all the war crime stuff in Congress and all that going on. That's a whole other kerfuffle. And it's eroding public trust in society. It's part of the reason why people are getting so angry and divided. It's not the only reason. The economy, poor infrastructure, lack of education for a lot of areas, et cetera, et cetera. But like that's part of it, is that it's starting to piss people off.
Yeah.
Why would you? I don't blame people who don't. I mean, I wish they would vote, but I don't blame people who say I don't feel like this is worth it to me, because my goodness, the government is trying to give you as much evidence as possible to say that it isn't worth it.
Right. Yeah, and there's specific entertainment industries too. You know, rodeos, horse racing, dolphin shows. Oh, you know, I was going to say that earlier about like, you know, talking about the little spider thingy with the REM eye movement. Dolphins have been, I mean, you know, oceanographers and people who oceanologists who study, you know, animals in the ocean have concluded that dolphins have social structure and have language.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have people that go around and kill them. Oh, there's
Mhm.
one. Oh, there's another documentary about just that thing. Oh my god, I got to remember these names.
And the thing with dolphins is that
bullfighting.
Yep.
Ugh.
Chevelle made a whole song against that. Shout out to Chevelle. And with dolphins is that like there are tons of mythologies and histories of dolphins helping stranded sailors and stuff like that. I'm like, what's the evolutionary advantage for them to help us? It could reasonably argue that they're helping us out of the kindness of their heart sometimes throughout history. So, like, maybe we ought to return the favor just out of pure respect.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's for a lot of cultural reasons that a lot of people aren't gonna give up on them. Like most cultures and most historical societies ate meat somehow, some way. You know, and there's also like some people would argue so this is really interesting too and disturbing because it's inconclusive because both sides have points. Is when it comes like climate change and agriculture, like our agricultural practice, even with climate change aside, is an utter disaster. Okay, as people see, like, you know, see what happens when you grow plants. You know, we should eat more meat. Like I know Lierre Keith from the Deep Green Resistance is avid. She's written a book called The Vegetarian Myth. And I've had her on this show and my other shows a bajillion times. And for a lot of ways, I adore Lierre. She's a strong feminist and she's an activist for the environment. But she's not having it with the vegetarian thing. She's saying, no, that's not true.
I'd have to look into this to get exact numbers, but from every study I've read, for basically take a square mile and you decide to center that 1 square mile entirely on beef production and another square mile entirely on agricultural production, pick whatever crop. The agriculture is going to be more productive as far as calories per out versus calories put in.
That's definitely
so like it's more financially sustainable. And then not just that, but environmentally, when we're using all of these specific how do I put this? A lot of different continents have rough equivalents of crops. Similar plants that do similar things that we can plant instead do not do damage to the ecosystem. Exactly. But for some of these, like, what's the equivalent for a cow on Tasmania historically? Nothing filled that niche, like not to that size. So like there's that for one. And then not just that, but also too, we have to think holistically as a society. And if we became more dependent on meat, I don't think suddenly people are going to get more apathetic about animal rights. So then the system would have to make more jurisdiction to resist people who want to advocate for animal rights, such as folks like me, whereas say if you farm more, you're probably not going to get as much resistance. And then, yes. And well, then not just that, but also on top of it, like crops can be edible within a year. I don't know too many farm animals that can be edible within a year, even when we stuff them full, when we stuff them to the brim full of hormones.
Crops can be edible within a few months.
And you could and that's even stuffing them full with hormones, which we shouldn't be doing, in my humble opinion, not just for the sake of the animals, but also for our own health.
Yeah, that's not good. Yeah, no, that's an interesting point for sure. You know, and like, there's other side. Like, have you ever heard of the China study in nutrition?
No, actually.
Okay, so it boasts of being the one a nutritional study that has the most amount of data. And the conclusion of the study is that the vegan diet is simply the best diet for the environment, for human health, for animals, for everything. Like, it's just comprehensively the best sort of way to go. And it was done by a PhD in nutrition, or at least some sort of scientist. He had the team headed up the team that did it all. And a lot of it came from like studies in like villages in China that have had these like age old, like they were vegans, at least at least 99% vegan, if not 100%. And there might have been some like goat or sheep milk in a couple, I don't know.
Yeah, it's about they use yak milk.
Yeah, right. And but like he's like, they're the healthiest people ever, like so yeah, no, it's very cool. I hate to do this, sir, ma'am. Sorry, I forgot to tell you I have to be done at 5:30.
Oh, I got you.
I can wrap
it up.
This conversation another time. There's a lot more to talk about. I meant to say it before we went on air. I started to, and then we got live, and like I stopped. My mother's having people over, and so she's like, "You need to be done by 5:30." I'm like, "Okay, crap." So cool. Sorry, but that was a good conversation. I think we said a lot in a half hour. And we had a few minutes to start there, so that's good. And there's a lot more to discuss for sure. There are more nuances. I mean, because there's another side that people are saying that, like, we can expand on all these points, I think, to a great degree. Especially like the contrast between like, the higher cognition of human versus, the cognition of animals and that kind of thing. Some people are very, 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 very fixated on that. Like, no, they do not have rights because they do not have responsibility. You can't have a right unless you're accountable for the right, for your choices. Like that kind of thing. And we can hammer that out in great more detail for sure.
Oh yeah. We definitely
have to do a second
part.
Shanti, her name is Shanti. She's a philosophy teacher at CLC. I had her on my radio show a long time ago, a couple times, and she's a vegetarian or maybe a vegan who believes in animal rights. And she said something I thought was interesting. She's like, just because you're not a moral agent doesn't mean you can't be a moral patient. Like, just because they don't have the same degree of agency as we do. And it goes back to suffering. Doesn't mean that they don't suffer and that we should avoid causing them suffering. So I like the language of the difference between a moral agent and a moral patient. How does a moral agent treat this? Like a doctor. That was pretty cool. So, all right, Alexandria, Keating, Sofiakis, thank you so much for coming on. Let's talk like kind of appreciate it again. Sorry to cut you off short. I meant to mention before.
You're good. Gives us excuse for a part two.
That exactly. I always love having you on. And again, Alexandria is a Green Party member here in Lake County, and she is going to be trying to. We need to chat about that. By the way, I talked to my lawyer friends about you being on the ballot, the write-in thing. Okay, it wasn't the best of all possible answers. I need to look at it deeply and more deeper into it. But yeah, let's chat about that. So okay, thank you so much, everybody, for tuning into the Let's Talk Lake County. I'm your host, David Rich. Till next time, keep talking.